The ice moon of Valthara spun slowly around its gas giant, casting purple shadows across crystalline valleys that had never known warmth. In the deepest canyon, where ancient geothermal vents created pockets of survivable atmosphere, lived creatures that defied the understanding of most galactic species. The Kithaeron were magnificent beings, standing nearly 10 feet tall when upright, with bodies perfectly adapted to their frozen world. Their thick spotted coats ranged from deep grays to pristine whites, and their powerful limbs could carry them across ice fields at incredible speeds. Among the Kithaeron, there existed legends of the Blessed Ones, individuals born with coats of pure white and eyes like frozen starlight. These albino Kithaeron were revered as touched by the ancient spirits of their world, destined for greatness. But greatness, as Zephyr learned early in life, often came with a terrible price. Zephyr had been born different even among the different. While other albino Kithaeron possessed the traditional pale blue eyes of their kind, her eyes were a striking violet, an anomaly that made even the elders whisper in hushed tones. Her coat was so white it seemed to glow against the perpetual twilight of Valthara, and her movements held a grace that spoke of untapped potential. The pain began when Zephyr reached adolescence. It started as a dull ache in her lower jaw, barely noticeable during the excitement of hunting lessons and territorial games. But as cycles passed, the pain grew more intense, more persistent. What began as occasional discomfort became a constant, throbbing agony that made eating difficult and sleep nearly impossible. The clan's healers examined her repeatedly, their ancient knowledge passed down through countless generations proving inadequate against this mysterious affliction. They tried traditional remedies, sacred ice baths, even dangerous journeys to the planet's most potent geothermal springs. Nothing provided more than temporary relief. Years crawled by with Zephyr's condition steadily worsening. The magnificent creature who should have been leading hunts and participating in the sacred competitions instead spent most of her time in isolated caves, emerging only when absolutely necessary. Her family watched helplessly as their blessed daughter became a shadow of herself, the light in her violet eyes dimming with each passing day. The other young Kithaeron, once eager to prove themselves worthy of her attention, now whispered that perhaps the spirits had cursed rather than blessed her. Some suggested that her unusual eye color was a sign of divine displeasure, that her suffering was punishment for some cosmic transgression. These whispers reached Zephyr's sensitive ears, adding emotional torment to her physical pain. During the worst episodes, when the pain flared so intensely that even her incredible Kithaeron endurance failed her, Zephyr would retreat to the deepest ice caves. There, surrounded by walls of ancient ice that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, she would curl into herself and wait for the agony to pass. Her powerful claws would sometimes scratch desperate furrows in the frozen ground as she fought against screaming aloud, knowing that any sign of weakness might bring more shame to her already concerned family. The Kithaeron had encountered other species during their recent entry into the galactic community. Various alien doctors had visited Valthara, representatives of advanced civilizations with technologies that seemed like magic. They brought scanning devices that could peer inside living bodies, medicines that could heal wounds in minutes, and surgical tools that could repair damaged organs with precision beyond imagination. Yet none of them could identify the source of Zephyr's torment. The Vrex physicians, with their multiple eyes and analytical minds, declared her dental structure perfectly normal. The crystalline Nephilim healers found no trace of disease or malformation in their harmonic scans. Even the renowned bioengineers of the hegemony, capable of rebuilding entire nervous systems, admitted defeat after extensive examinations. As news of the mysterious case spread through medical communities across the galaxy, Zephyr became something of a legend herself, though not the kind she had once imagined. She was the unsolvable puzzle, the patient who humbled the greatest minds in galactic medicine. Research teams arrived periodically, each convinced they would be the ones to crack the mystery, only to leave Valthara as baffled as those who came before. The pain had changed Zephyr's entire existence. Where once she had been destined for leadership, she now spent her days managing an invisible enemy that attacked without warning or mercy. Her family's concern was evident in every interaction, their helplessness a constant reminder of how far she had fallen from their expectations. But Zephyr possessed something that even the pain couldn't fully diminish: the inherent strength and pride of her people. Despite her suffering, she maintained her dignity and refused to surrender completely to despair. In her clearer moments, when the pain receded to manageable levels, she would venture to the observation platforms carved into Valthara's ice cliffs. From these vantage points, she could see the stars that held other worlds, other civilizations, other possibilities. Sometimes supply ships would arrive, bringing news from across the galaxy. She learned about the ongoing conflicts, the technological marvels, the diverse species that made up the galactic community. Most intriguingly, she heard stories about a relatively new species called humans, who had recently emerged from their small blue world to make an impact far beyond what their brief technological development should have allowed. Humans, according to the stories, possessed an unusual trait among galactic species. They seemed to excel at solving problems that stumped more advanced civilizations. Their approach to challenges was described as unconventional, sometimes even reckless, but undeniably effective. They had ended wars that had lasted millennia, solved resource crises that threatened entire sectors, and demonstrated a peculiar talent for understanding and helping other species in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves. These stories planted a seed of hope in Zephyr's pain-clouded mind. Perhaps somewhere among these strange humans was someone who might see what others had missed, someone who could offer the relief that advanced galactic medicine had failed to provide. It was a desperate hope, she knew, but hope nonetheless. As another wave of pain began building behind her jaw, Zephyr made a decision that would change everything. She would find a way to contact these humans, these problem solvers who seemed to specialize in the impossible. If the greatest medical minds in the galaxy couldn't help her, perhaps it was time to try the perspective of the galaxy's newest and most unpredictable species. The Human Research Station orbited a dwarf star 3 systems away from Valthara, a modest facility that looked almost primitive compared to the massive installations favored by other galactic civilizations, where the hegemony built gleaming pyramids of impossible materials, and the Virex constructed sprawling networks of interconnected spheres. The humans had assembled what appeared to be a collection of cylindrical modules connected by simple corridors. Dr. Elena Vasquez had volunteered for the deep space assignment, partly to escape the academic politics of Earth's universities and partly because she genuinely believed that humanity's future lay in understanding and helping their new galactic neighbors. At 28, she was young for a xenobiologist, but her unconventional thinking had already earned her recognition for solving several interspecies medical puzzles that had stumped more experienced researchers. Elena's specialty was what she called practical xenobiology, the study of alien life forms with a focus on immediate, real-world applications rather than pure theoretical research. She had a talent for looking at complex alien physiology and finding simple, elegant solutions that others overlooked. Her colleagues sometimes joked that she had more in common with an old-fashioned country veterinarian than a cutting-edge scientist. But her results spoke for themselves. When the message arrived from Valthara, transmitted through the standard diplomatic channels but marked as a medical inquiry, Elena almost dismissed it as another routine consultation. The attached files described a Kitharan suffering from chronic pain of unknown origin, a case that had already stumped dozens of prominent galactic physicians. The request was simple. Would any human medical personnel be willing to examine the patient? Elena's first instinct was to forward the message to someone more qualified, but something about the case intrigued her. She spent hours reviewing the extensive medical records, noting the exhaustive tests that had been performed and the complete lack of positive results. Every scan showed normal anatomy. Every blood analysis revealed typical Kitharan biochemistry. Every examination concluded that the patient should be perfectly healthy. The more Elena studied the case, the more familiar it seemed. She had encountered similar situations during her veterinary training on Earth, cases where sophisticated equipment failed to reveal what careful observation and hands-on examination could discover. Sometimes the most advanced technology missed the simplest problems. Against the advice of her station commander, who worried about the political implications if she failed where renowned galactic experts had succeeded, Elena requested permission to travel to Valthara. The approval process took weeks of bureaucratic navigation, during which Elena continued researching Kitharan physiology and corresponding with Zephyr's family through increasingly frequent messages. Through these communications, Elena learned more about Zephyr's condition than any of the previous medical reports had revealed. The timing of pain episodes, the specific triggers that seemed to worsen the discomfort, the exact location where the agony seemed most concentrated. Most importantly, she learned that Zephyr's unusual eye color wasn't the only anomaly. The young Kithaerin also possessed several other subtle physical differences that previous doctors had dismissed as natural variation. When Elena's transport finally approached Valthara, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The ice moon was breathtakingly beautiful, its surface covered in crystalline formations that caught and reflected the light of its parent gas giant. But beauty couldn't disguise the harshness of this world, where temperatures that would instantly kill most species were considered pleasantly warm. The Kithaerin who met her at the landing facility moved with fluid grace despite their imposing size, their thick coats rippling in the artificial atmosphere of the docking bay. Elena had studied their physiology extensively, but seeing them in person was still startling. They were magnificent predators perfectly adapted to their environment, yet they greeted her with courtesy and evident hope. Zephyr's father, a massive Kithaerin named Thane, whose gray coat was marked with intricate darker patterns, led Elena through corridors carved directly from the ice. The walls were smooth and gleaming, decorated with beautiful spiral patterns that seemed to flow like frozen water. Bioluminescent panels provided gentle blue-green light that was easier on Kithaerin eyes than the harsh white illumination favored by most species. When Elena finally met Zephyr, she was struck by how fragile the young Kithaerin appeared despite her impressive size. The pure white coat that should have been the pride of her people seemed somehow dimmed, and her remarkable violet eyes held a weary quality that spoke of years of unrelenting suffering. Even in her current diminished state, however, Zephyr possessed an undeniable dignity and intelligence that immediately impressed the human doctor. Their first meeting was necessarily brief, as Zephyr was experiencing one of her more difficult days. Elena observed how the Kithaerin held her head, noting the subtle ways she favored her left side and the careful movements she made when turning or speaking. These observations, combined with her review of previous examinations, began to paint a picture that none of the sophisticated scanners had captured. Over the following days, Elena spent hours with Zephyr and her family, learning about Kithaerin culture while conducting her own examination, using tools that seemed almost primitive by galactic standards. She brought no advanced scanners or molecular analyzers, just the basic instruments that human dentists had been using for centuries, along with her own carefully trained senses. What Elena discovered during her hands-on examination was both simple and extraordinary. Hidden beneath Zephyr's gum line, in a location that most scanning equipment couldn't properly visualize due to the density of Kithaerin bone structure, was something that shouldn't exist, an extra tooth that had been growing sideways for years, pressing against nerves and creating the chronic agony that had made Zephyr's life miserable. The condition was so basic that it would have been immediately obvious to any human dentist. But Kithaerin dental structure was supposedly completely mapped by galactic science. According to every textbook and database, what Elena was seeing was impossible. Kithaerin didn't grow extra teeth. Their dental development was considered one of the most predictable aspects of their biology. Yet there it was, clear as daylight under Elena's simple examination light, an impacted wisdom tooth, essentially identical to a condition that human dentists had been treating for thousands of years. The sophisticated alien scanners had been looking for exotic diseases and complex neurological disorders, completely missing the mundane reality of basic dental problems. Elena's excitement at solving the mystery was tempered by the realization of what this meant for Zephyr. The tooth would need to be removed, a procedure that any human oral surgeon could perform in their sleep, but which would require convincing the Kithaerin medical establishment that their fundamental understanding of their own species was incomplete. As Elena prepared to explain her findings to Zephyr and her family, she reflected on the beautiful irony of the situation. The most advanced medical minds in the galaxy had been stumped by a condition that human medicine had been successfully treating since ancient times. Sometimes, she realized, the newest perspective was exactly what was needed to see the oldest problems. In the weeks following the successful surgery, Zephyr's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The constant pain that had defined her existence for years was replaced by a freedom of movement and expression that amazed everyone who knew her. Her appetite returned with a vengeance, and she began gaining weight and muscle mass at a rate that impressed even Elena, who had hoped for good results but hadn't anticipated such dramatic improvement. The young Kithaeron threw herself into recovery with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. She insisted on participating in hunting expeditions despite her family's concerns, pushed herself through physical exercises that would have been challenging, even for a healthy Kithaeron, and spent long hours practicing the traditional combat forms that she had been unable to perform during her years of illness. Elena remained on Valthara during this recovery period, officially to monitor Zephyr's healing, but actually because she had become genuinely fascinated by Kithaeron society and physiology. Her success with Zephyr had opened doors throughout the galactic medical community, but she found herself more interested in the individual relationships she was building than in the professional opportunities that were suddenly available. The friendship that developed between the young human doctor and the albino Kithaeron was unprecedented in both their species' histories. Zephyr was eager to learn about human culture and Earth's diverse environments, while Elena found herself studying Kithaeron traditions and philosophy with the enthusiasm of a natural anthropologist. Their conversations, conducted in a mixture of galactic standard and the musical Kithaeron language that Elena was gradually learning, covered everything from advanced medical theory to childhood games. These discussions revealed important information that had implications far beyond Zephyr's individual case. Elena discovered that abnormal dental development, while rare among Kithaeron, was not entirely unknown in their historical records. Ancient texts mentioned occasional individuals who suffered from jaw fire that could only be cured by shamanic rituals involving the removal of spirit teeth. These references had been dismissed by modern Kithaeron medicine as primitive superstition, but Elena recognized them as accurate descriptions of impacted tooth extraction. The realization that this condition had existed throughout Kithaeron history, but had been forgotten by modern medical science led to a broader investigation. Elena worked with Kithaeron historians and human research teams to examine the medical records of other species, looking for similar gaps between ancient knowledge and contemporary understanding. What they found was disturbing and enlightening in equal measure. Across dozens of species, traditional healing practices had been abandoned in favor of sophisticated alien medicine, but many of these traditional practices had addressed real conditions that modern galactic medicine couldn't recognize or treat. The standardization of medical knowledge across the galaxy had created impressive capabilities for treating complex diseases, but it had also created blind spots for simple problems that didn't fit established patterns. Zephyr's case became the catalyst for a movement that Elena came to call medical archaeology, the systematic examination of traditional healing practices across different species to identify effective treatments that had been lost or dismissed. The project attracted researchers from across the galaxy, many of whom had their own stories of impossible conditions that defied conventional treatment. Dr. Zenth of the Vrex Collective, who had been among Elena's harshest critics, eventually requested a private meeting, during which he admitted that his own species had abandoned several traditional diagnostic techniques that might have proven more effective than their current methods. His eight-eyed vision, considered the gold standard for medical observation, was actually less effective for certain types of examination than the simple, hands-on techniques that human doctors still employed. The collaboration that emerged from these discussions led to remarkable discoveries. The crystalline Nephilim contributed harmonic diagnostic methods that could detect conditions invisible to conventional scanners. The Hegemony's bioengineers found ways to combine their advanced surgical tools with traditional techniques from dozens of species. Even the warlike Dakari shared ancient battlefield medicine that proved remarkably effective for treating certain types of trauma. Meanwhile, Zephyr had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy. Her recovery story was featured in medical journals across dozens of species, and she received visitors from research institutions that wanted to study her unusual physiology. But rather than being overwhelmed by the attention, she seemed to thrive on the opportunity to help advance medical knowledge that might prevent others from suffering as she had. Elena watched with pride and some concern as her patient adapted to her new status. Zephyr had always been destined for leadership among her people, but her suffering had delayed that destiny for years. Now, with her health restored and her unique experience making her valuable to the broader galactic community, she was being thrust into a role that was larger than anything the Kithaeron had previously imagined. The concern proved justified when several research institutions began competing for access to Zephyr, some offering substantial compensation for exclusive study rights. Elena found herself in the unexpected position of protecting her patient from the very medical community that she was trying to serve. The irony wasn't lost on her that Zephyr's recovery had made her valuable in ways that might ultimately prove as limiting as her previous illness. The situation came to a head when a hegemony research corporation offered to purchase Zephyr's medical data and exclusive access to her genetics for a sum that would have made her family wealthy beyond imagination. The offer was presented as a generous opportunity, but Elena recognized it as an attempt to turn a living being into a permanent research subject. Zephyr herself was torn by the offer. The compensation would transform life for all Kithaeron, providing resources that could improve medical care and living conditions throughout their society. But accepting would mean leaving Valthara permanently and submitting to a lifetime of tests and examinations that would reduce her once again to a medical curiosity rather than a person. Elena's response was swift and decisive. She leveraged her newfound influence in the galactic medical community to organize support for Zephyr's autonomy, arguing that the young Kithaeron's greatest value lay not in her unusual physiology, but in her lived experience and intelligent insights. Rather than being a subject for study, she should be a partner in research, contributing her unique perspective to help solve other medical mysteries. The campaign that Elena organized on Zephyr's behalf brought together an unlikely coalition of researchers, patient advocates, and political leaders who recognized that medical progress should enhance life rather than exploit it. They proposed an alternative arrangement in which Zephyr would work as a consulting researcher, contributing to various projects while maintaining her freedom and dignity. The proposal was revolutionary in its implications. Never before had a patient been considered qualified to participate as an equal in their own medical research. The idea that someone's personal experience with illness and recovery might be as valuable as advanced degrees and centuries of study challenged fundamental assumptions about expertise and authority in galactic medicine. As debates raged across research institutions and political assemblies, Elena and Zephyr worked together to develop the framework for this new kind of medical collaboration. They envisioned research partnerships where patients and doctors worked together as equals, combining technical expertise with lived experience to solve problems that neither could address alone. The friendship that had begun with a simple dental extraction was evolving into something that would reshape galactic medicine forever. In the weeks following the successful surgery, Zephyr's transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The constant pain that had defined her existence for years was replaced by a freedom of movement and expression that amazed everyone who knew her. Her appetite returned with a vengeance, and she began gaining weight and muscle mass at a rate that impressed even Elena, who had hoped for good results but hadn't anticipated such dramatic improvement. The young Kithaeron threw herself into recovery with an enthusiasm that bordered on reckless. She insisted on participating in hunting expeditions despite her family's concerns, pushed herself through physical exercises that would have been challenging, even for a healthy Kithaeron, and spent long hours practicing the traditional combat forms that she had been unable to perform during her years of illness. Elena remained on Valthara during this recovery period, officially to monitor Zephyr's healing, but actually because she had become genuinely fascinated by Kithaeron society and physiology. Her success with Zephyr had opened doors throughout the galactic medical community, but she found herself more interested in the individual relationships she was building than in the professional opportunities that were suddenly available. The friendship that developed between the young human doctor and the albino Kithaeron was unprecedented in both their species' histories. Zephyr was eager to learn about human culture and Earth's diverse environments, while Elena found herself studying Kithaeron traditions and philosophy with the enthusiasm of a natural anthropologist. Their conversations, conducted in a mixture of galactic standard and the musical Kithaeron language that Elena was gradually learning, covered everything from advanced medical theory to childhood games. These discussions revealed important information that had implications far beyond Zephyr's individual case. Elena discovered that abnormal dental development, while rare among Kithaeron, was not entirely unknown in their historical records. Ancient texts mentioned occasional individuals who suffered from jaw fire that could only be cured by shamanic rituals involving the removal of spirit teeth. These references had been dismissed by modern Kithaeron medicine as primitive superstition, but Elena recognized them as accurate descriptions of impacted tooth extraction. The realization that this condition had existed throughout Kithaeron history, but had been forgotten by modern medical science, led to a broader investigation. Elena worked with Kithaeron historians and human research teams to examine the medical records of other species, looking for similar gaps between ancient knowledge and contemporary understanding. What they found was disturbing and enlightening in equal measure. Across dozens of species, traditional healing practices had been abandoned in favor of sophisticated alien medicine, but many of these traditional practices had addressed real conditions that modern galactic medicine couldn't recognize or treat. The standardization of medical knowledge across the galaxy had created impressive capabilities for treating complex diseases, but it had also created blind spots for simple problems that didn't fit established patterns. Zephyr's case became the catalyst for a movement that Elena came to call medical archaeology, the systematic examination of traditional healing practices across different species to identify effective treatments that had been lost or dismissed. The project attracted researchers from across the galaxy, many of whom had their own stories of impossible conditions that defied conventional treatment. Dr. Zenth of the Vrex Collective, who had been among Elena's harshest critics, eventually requested a private meeting, during which he admitted that his own species had abandoned several traditional diagnostic techniques that might have proven more effective than their current methods. His eight-eyed vision, considered the gold standard for medical observation, was actually less effective for certain types of examination than the simple, hands-on techniques that human doctors still employed. The collaboration that emerged from these discussions led to remarkable discoveries. The crystalline Nephilim contributed harmonic diagnostic methods that could detect conditions invisible to conventional scanners. The Hegemony's bioengineers found ways to combine their advanced surgical tools with traditional techniques from dozens of species. Even the warlike Dakari shared ancient battlefield medicine that proved remarkably effective for treating certain types of trauma. Meanwhile, Zephyr had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy. Her recovery story was featured in medical journals across dozens of species, and she received visitors from research institutions that wanted to study her unusual physiology. But rather than being overwhelmed by the attention, she seemed to thrive on the opportunity to help advance medical knowledge that might prevent others from suffering as she had. Elena watched with pride and some concern as her patient adapted to her new status. Zephyr had always been destined for leadership among her people, but her suffering had delayed that destiny for years. Now, with her health restored and her unique experience making her valuable to the broader galactic community, she was being thrust into a role that was larger than anything the Kithaeron had previously imagined. The concern proved justified when several research institutions began competing for access to Zephyr, some offering substantial compensation for exclusive study rights. Elena found herself in the unexpected position of protecting her patient from the very medical community that she was trying to serve. The irony wasn't lost on her that Zephyr's recovery had made her valuable in ways that might ultimately prove as limiting as her previous illness. The situation came to a head when a Hegemony Research Corporation offered to purchase Zephyr's medical data and exclusive access to her genetics for a sum that would have made her family wealthy beyond imagination. The offer was presented as a generous opportunity, but Elena recognized it as an attempt to turn a living being into a permanent research subject. Zephyr herself was torn by the offer. The compensation would transform life for all Kithaeron, providing resources that could improve medical care and living conditions throughout their society. But accepting would mean leaving Valthara permanently and submitting to a lifetime of tests and examinations that would reduce her once again to a medical curiosity rather than a person. Elena's response was swift and decisive. She leveraged her newfound influence in the galactic medical community to organize support for Zephyr's autonomy. arguing that the young Kithaeron's greatest value lay not in her unusual physiology, but in her lived experience and intelligent insights. Rather than being a subject for study, she should be a partner in research, contributing her unique perspective to help solve other medical mysteries. The campaign that Elena organized on Zephyr's behalf brought together an unlikely coalition of researchers, patient advocates, and political leaders who recognized that medical progress should enhance life rather than exploit it. They proposed an alternative arrangement in which Zephyr would work as a consulting researcher, contributing to various projects while maintaining her freedom and dignity. The proposal was revolutionary in its implications. Never before had a patient been considered qualified to participate as an equal in their own medical research. The idea that someone's personal experience with illness and recovery might be as valuable as advanced degrees and centuries of study challenged fundamental assumptions about expertise and authority in galactic medicine. As debates raged across research institutions and political assemblies, Elena and Zephyr worked together to develop the framework for this new kind of medical collaboration. They envisioned research partnerships where patients and doctors worked together as equals, combining technical expertise with lived experience to solve problems that neither could address alone. The friendship that had begun with a simple dental extraction was evolving into something that would reshape galactic medicine forever. The establishment of the Galactic Medical Collaboration Initiative marked a turning point not just in healthcare, but in how different species approached knowledge sharing and problem solving. Elena and Zephyr found themselves at the center of a movement that attracted support from unexpected quarters while facing resistance from entrenched interests that preferred the traditional hierarchy of medical authority. The first official project under the new initiative involved a condition affecting the Aquarian species, water-based beings who had been suffering from a mysterious degradation of their bioluminescent organs. Traditional treatments had failed completely, and the condition was spreading throughout their population with alarming speed. The Aquarians were facing potential extinction if a solution couldn't be found. Elena and Zephyr traveled to the Aquarian homeworld, a planet covered entirely by vast oceans that glowed with the natural light of its inhabitants. The beauty of the underwater cities was breathtaking, but the dimming lights that marked diseased Aquarians created an atmosphere of desperate urgency that reminded both visitors of Zephyr's darkest days. Working with Aquarian healers and patients, Elena applied the same hands-on diagnostic approach that had solved Zephyr's case. But the challenge was far greater here. The Aquarian physiology was completely different from anything in her experience, and their environment was hostile to human life. She had to work in a specialized underwater suit that limited her mobility and made precise examination extremely difficult. Zephyr proved invaluable in this investigation. Her experience as a patient gave her insights into the subtle signs of suffering that medical professionals often overlooked. She noticed behavioral patterns among the affected Aquarians that reminded her of her own pain responses, observations that led Elena to examine specific areas that other researchers had ignored. The breakthrough came when Zephyr suggested that Elena examine the Aquarians during their feeding cycles rather than during rest periods when most medical examinations were traditionally conducted. This timing allowed Elena to observe something remarkable. The bioluminescent organs dimmed significantly when the Aquarians consumed certain types of food that had become increasingly common in their diet. The cause proved to be environmental contamination from mining, operations that had introduced trace metals into the ocean ecosystem. These metals accumulated in the food chain and interfered with the delicate biochemical processes that powered Aquarian luminescence. The solution involved both medical treatment to remove accumulated toxins and environmental remediation to clean their oceans. But the real breakthrough was methodological. Elena's diagnostic approach, guided by Zephyr's patient perspective, had identified the problem's environmental component in weeks, rather than the years that traditional research methods had spent examining the condition in isolation from its context. The success established the collaboration model as a legitimate alternative to conventional medical research. Word of their success spread rapidly through the galactic community, bringing requests for assistance from species across the galaxy. Each case presented unique challenges that tested the limits of their partnership. They helped the silicon-based crystalloids solve a fracturing condition that was causing their bodies to literally fall apart. They worked with the hegemony to address a psychological condition that was affecting their bioengineered soldier castes. They even assisted the warlike Dakari in treating a genetic disorder that was weakening their warrior culture. With each success, Elena and Zephyr refined their collaborative approach. They developed protocols for incorporating patient perspectives into research design, created training programs for other doctor-patient research teams, and established ethical guidelines that ensured subjects maintained autonomy throughout the investigation process. Their work was becoming a new medical discipline that combined the rigorous methodology of scientific research with the practical wisdom of lived experience. The partnership also deepened their friendship in ways that surprised both of them. Elena had expected to return to human space after solving Zephyr's case, but found herself committed to their shared mission in ways that made her previous career goals seem small and self-centered. Zephyr, meanwhile, discovered that her painful years had prepared her for a role she had never imagined, using her experience of suffering to help prevent others from enduring similar ordeals. Their success inevitably attracted criticism and political complications. The Vrex Collective formally complained that human medical practices were undermining established protocols and creating dangerous precedents. Several hegemony research institutions accused Elena of practicing medicine without proper galactic certification, demanding that she submit to their licensing requirements or cease treating non-human patients. More seriously, some species governments worried that the collaborative model was too democratic, giving individual patients too much influence over medical decisions that should be left to properly trained professionals. They feared that encouraging patients to question medical authority would undermine the hierarchical structures that maintained social order in their societies. Elena and Zephyr faced these challenges by demonstrating the effectiveness of their methods rather than engaging in political arguments. They documented their successes meticulously, creating case studies that showed clear improvements in both medical outcomes and patient satisfaction compared to traditional treatment approaches. They also trained other teams to replicate their methods, proving that their success wasn't dependent on their unique partnership but could be achieved by any doctor-patient team that embraced collaborative principles. The turning point in the political resistance came when Elena was invited to address the Galactic Medical Council, the governing body that regulated healthcare standards across all member species. The invitation was actually a trap set by her critics, who expected her to fail when subjected to rigorous questioning by the galaxy's most senior medical authorities. Elena brought Zephyr with her to the council chambers, a breach of protocol that outraged traditionalists but which she insisted was essential to accurately represent their collaborative approach. Standing before representatives of dozens of species, many of whom considered humans barely qualified to practice medicine on their own kind, Elena presented their case with quiet confidence. Rather than defending her methods in theoretical terms, Elena let their results speak for themselves. She presented case after case where traditional approaches had failed, but collaborative diagnosis had succeeded, demonstrating pattern after pattern where patient insights had revealed crucial information that professional expertise had missed. But it was Zephyr who delivered the most powerful argument. Speaking in her carefully practiced galactic standard, she described what it meant to be seen as a person rather than a problem, to be heard rather than simply examined, to participate in her own healing rather than passively submitting to treatment. Her words carried the authority of lived experience that no amount of professional credentials could match. When she finished speaking, the council chambers were silent for long moments. Then, unexpectedly, Dr. Zenth of the Vrex Collective stood and formally moved to recognize the Galactic Medical Collaboration Initiative as an official research methodology. His motion was seconded by representatives from more than a dozen other species, including some who had been among Elena's harshest critics. The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive enough to establish legitimacy for their approach and protection for the teams that wanted to adopt collaborative methods. More importantly, it represented a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization thought about knowledge, expertise, and the value of different perspectives in solving complex problems. 3 years after the Galactic Medical Council's historic vote, the collaboration initiative had grown from an experimental partnership into a galaxy-spanning network of doctor-patient research teams. Medical schools across dozens of species had begun incorporating collaborative methodologies into their curricula, and patient advocacy groups had emerged on worlds where such concepts had previously been unthinkable. Elena and Zephyr had become unlikely celebrities in the galactic community, invited to speak at conferences, consulted on policy decisions, and featured in media coverage that portrayed them as pioneers of a new approach to medical care. But their greatest satisfaction came from the steady stream of success stories reported by teams using their methods across the galaxy. The partnership had also evolved in unexpected ways. Elena had formally established residency on Valthara, building a research facility that served as both her home and headquarters for the collaboration initiative. The Ice Moon, once considered a remote backwater, had become a pilgrimage destination for medical researchers and patients seeking alternatives to traditional treatment approaches. Zephyr, meanwhile, had emerged as a diplomatic figure in her own right. Her unique experience bridging the gap between patient and researcher had made her an invaluable mediator in conflicts between different species medical establishments. She had successfully negotiated agreements that allowed collaborative teams to work across political boundaries that had previously prevented effective medical cooperation. Their success had not gone unnoticed by humanity's political leaders, who recognized the soft power benefits of their species being associated with groundbreaking humanitarian work. Elena received offers to return to Earth and lead prestigious research institutions, while various human corporations offered substantial compensation for exclusive access to their methodologies. But both Elena and Zephyr had learned to be wary of attempts to commercialize or politicize their work. They had seen how easily medical advances could be corrupted by competing interests and had developed protocols that protected the independence and integrity of collaborative research teams. The real test of their movement's sustainability came when they faced their most challenging case yet. The ethereals, an ancient species that communicated through pure thought and existed primarily as energy beings, had begun experiencing what could only be described as a collective madness. Their civilization, which had endured for millions of years, was fragmenting as individuals lost the ability to maintain coherent consciousness. Traditional medical approaches were completely inadequate for treating energy-based life forms whose physiology defied conventional understanding. The ethereals themselves were unable to communicate coherently about their symptoms, making diagnosis nearly impossible through standard methods. Elena realized that this case would require expanding their collaborative model in ways that tested its fundamental assumptions. Working with a patient required communication and consent, but the ethereal's condition made meaningful interaction extremely difficult. She would need to find ways to understand and help beings whose very nature was incompatible with her human perspective. The solution came through an unexpected source: the deep meditation practices of human mystics combined with Kitharan dream-sharing techniques that Zephyr had learned during her recovery. By entering altered states of consciousness, Elena and Zephyr could establish limited contact with the ethereals and begin to understand their experience from the inside. What they discovered challenged everything they thought they knew about consciousness and medical treatment. The ethereals were suffering from a kind of psychic pollution caused by the increasing noise of galactic civilization's electronic communications. As more species developed advanced technology, the background electromagnetic radiation had reached levels that interfered with the ethereal's delicate mental processes. The condition required treatment that was part medical intervention and part environmental remediation. Elena worked with ethereal healers to develop shielding techniques that could protect their consciousness from electromagnetic interference, while Zephyr coordinated with galactic authorities to establish communication protocols that minimized harmful radiation in areas where ethereals lived. But the deeper significance of the ethereal case lay in what it revealed about the interconnectedness of all galactic life. The advancement of technology that benefited most species was inadvertently destroying one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations. The solution required unprecedented cooperation between species with completely different needs and priorities. Elena found herself mediating between groups that had never imagined they could affect each other's welfare. Industrial species had to modify their communication systems to reduce electromagnetic pollution, while the ethereals had to accept technological assistance that violated their traditional preference for purely natural existence. The negotiations were complicated by the fact that many species initially refused to believe that their technology could harm energy beings they couldn't even detect. Elena had to develop new methods for demonstrating causal relationships between electromagnetic activity and ethereal distress, creating visible proof of invisible connections. The breakthrough came when Zephyr suggested conducting the demonstrations during major galactic communication events, when multiple species were broadcasting simultaneously across space. The correlation between communication activity and ethereal suffering became undeniable when observed in real time, forcing even skeptical governments to acknowledge the connection. The resulting treaties established the first galactic environmental protection standards designed to preserve the welfare of energy-based life forms. More importantly, they created precedents for considering the needs of radically different species when developing new technologies. Elena and Zephyr's role in solving the ethereal crisis elevated their status from medical innovators to galactic statesmen. Their collaborative approach had proven effective not just for diagnosing individual conditions, but for addressing systemic problems that affected entire species. The methodologies they had developed for bridging different perspectives had applications far beyond medical research, but success brought new pressures and responsibilities that tested their partnership in unexpected ways. Elena found herself spending more time in diplomatic meetings than in medical practice, while Zephyr was increasingly called upon to represent Kitharan interests in galactic political discussions. The strain began to show during their work on a complex case involving a trade dispute between the hegemony and the crystalloids that was affecting the health of both populations. The stress of constant travel and high-stakes negotiations was wearing on both of them, and they began to disagree about priorities and methods in ways that hadn't happened during their medical work. The tension came to a head during a particularly difficult mediation session when Elena accused Zephyr of prioritizing political considerations over patient welfare, while Zephyr suggested that Elena's human tendency toward direct confrontation was undermining their diplomatic effectiveness. Their argument was witnessed by delegates from multiple species, many of whom had opposed the collaboration initiative from the beginning and were pleased to see evidence that the partnership was failing under pressure. News of their conflict spread quickly through the galactic media, with critics suggesting that the entire collaborative model was inherently unstable. Elena and Zephyr realized that their personal relationship had become entangled with the broader political implications of their work in ways that threatened both their friendship and their mission. They needed to find a way to resolve their differences while maintaining the integrity of the movement they had created. The solution they developed would prove as important as any of their medical breakthroughs, establishing principles for managing conflict and maintaining collaboration under pressure that would benefit partnerships throughout the galaxy. Elena and Zephyr's retreat to the deepest ice caves of Valthera was both a practical necessity and a symbolic return to their origins. Away from the political pressures and media attention that had complicated their relationship, they could focus on the fundamental principles that had brought them together and made their partnership successful. In the crystalline chambers where Zephyr had once hidden from her pain, they established a temporary research facility dedicated to understanding conflict resolution between different species. They approached their own disagreement with the same methodical curiosity they had applied to medical mysteries, treating their relationship as a case study in collaborative problem-solving. The process was more difficult than diagnosing physical ailments because it required them to acknowledge their own limitations and biases. Elena had to confront her tendency to prioritize immediate solutions over long-term relationship building, while Zephyr needed to address her fear that direct confrontation would destroy the delicate political alliances they had built. Their breakthrough came when they realized that their conflict wasn't actually about methods or priorities, but about the pressure they both felt to represent their respective species perfectly. Elena felt responsible for maintaining humanity's reputation as effective problem solvers, while Zephyr worried about proving that non-traditional approaches could succeed in galactic politics. These external expectations had gradually distorted their decision-making, causing them to second-guess their instincts and compromise the collaborative principles that had made them effective. They had become performers playing roles rather than genuine partners working together toward shared goals. The solution involved establishing clear boundaries between their partnership and their broader political roles. They developed protocols that protected their collaborative work from political pressure, while still allowing them to contribute to galactic governance when appropriate. Most importantly, they created formal mechanisms for addressing disagreements before they escalated into conflicts. When they emerged from their retreat 6 weeks later, Elena and Zephyr brought with them the conflict resolution protocols, a framework that could be applied to any collaborative partnership facing internal or external pressure. The protocols emphasized transparency, regular communication, and the importance of separating personal relationships from political considerations. Their first test case was the hegemony crystalloid trade dispute that had triggered their original conflict. Applying their new protocols, they were able to facilitate negotiations that addressed the underlying health concerns while respecting both species' political and economic interests. The success demonstrated that their partnership had emerged stronger from their difficulties. The protocols were quickly adopted by other collaborative teams throughout the galaxy, and their effectiveness led to requests for assistance with increasingly complex interspecies conflicts. Elena and Zephyr found themselves pioneers not just in medicine, but in the broader field of collaborative governance. 5 years after Elena first arrived on Valthara, the transformation was complete. What had begun as a simple medical consultation had evolved into a new model for how different species could work together to solve complex problems. The Galactic Medical Collaboration Initiative had spawned similar programs in fields ranging from environmental science to conflict resolution. Elena's research facility on Valthara had grown into a major educational institution where representatives from hundreds of species came to learn collaborative methodologies. The ice moon that had once been a remote outpost was now a vital center of galactic civilization, its frozen valleys hosting conferences and workshops that shaped policy across the galaxy. Zephyr had become the first non-government representative to address the Galactic Council, speaking eloquently about the importance of including diverse perspectives in decision-making processes. Her unique status as both patient and researcher had given her authority to advocate for individuals and groups whose voices were traditionally excluded from political discourse. But perhaps the most significant change was in how different species viewed the concept of expertise itself. The rigid hierarchies that had once dominated galactic medicine and governance had given way to more flexible models that recognized the value of multiple perspectives. Experience was no longer considered inferior to education, and the insights of those directly affected by problems were valued alongside the knowledge of professional experts. Elena often reflected on the journey that had brought her from a modest human research station to a position of galactic influence. Her success hadn't come from superior human technology or exceptional individual brilliance, but from humanity's willingness to listen, to question established assumptions, and to value practical results over theoretical perfection. The friendship between the human doctor and the albino Kitharin had become a symbol of what was possible when different species approached each other with genuine curiosity and respect. Their story was taught in schools across the galaxy as an example of how personal relationships could drive broader social change. On quiet evenings in their shared quarters at the research facility, Elena and Zephyr would often return to the simple pleasure of conversation that had sustained their partnership through all its evolution. They discussed everything from the latest research findings to childhood memories, maintaining the personal connection that had made their professional collaboration so effective. Zephyr's violet eyes, once dulled by constant pain, now sparkled with the satisfaction of a life spent in meaningful service to others. Her pure white coat had regained its lustrous beauty, and her movements displayed the grace and power that her species valued in their finest individuals. Elena had found in her alien friend something she hadn't even known she was seeking, a true partner whose different perspective enhanced rather than challenged her own capabilities. Their relationship had taught her that the most profound discoveries often came from the intersection between different ways of understanding the world. The galaxy was a very different place than it had been when Elena first answered the message from Valthara. Species that had once maintained rigid separation were collaborating on projects that benefited entire civilizations. Medical treatments that had seemed impossible were now routine, Most importantly, the idea that wisdom could come from anyone, regardless of their background or credentials, had become accepted throughout galactic society. As they watched the aurora displays that painted Valthara's sky in brilliant colors, Elena and Zephyr talked about the future they had helped create. There were still mysteries to solve, conflicts to mediate, and partnerships to build. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges that would require new applications of their collaborative approach. But tonight, sitting together in the crystalline chamber where their friendship had been forged, they were content to appreciate how far they had come from that first moment when a young human doctor had looked at an alien's mouth and seen not an exotic mystery, but a simple dental problem that any human dentist could fix. The revolution that changed galactic medicine and governance had begun with something as ordinary as a wisdom tooth and as extraordinary as the friendship between two beings who chose to trust each other across the vast differences that separated their species. In the end, that trust had proven more powerful than any technology, more valuable than any expertise, and more transformative than any political movement. Their story had become legend throughout the galaxy, but for Elena and Zephyr, it remained beautifully simple: a human who listened and a Catharen who trusted, working together to heal not just individual patients, but the relationships between entire civilizations.